Damage to the amygdala interferes with the learning of fear responses, the retention of fear responses previously learned, and interpreting or understanding stimuli with emotional consequences. So basically your book, I believe, is talking about the Clover-Bucy syndrome, which was found in the, I want to say that was the early 1900s, where they damaged portions of the amygdala, and the monkeys just didn't seem to have fear of snakes anymore. They didn't seem to have fear of fire. They seemed to have very inappropriate emotions, and so there's part of the amygdala seems to be involved in our learning of the fear responses. fMRI studies suggest that the amygdala responds strongly to emotional stimuli and facial expressions. We've gone over that before. Activity is strongest when the meaning is unclear and requires some processing. It responds more strongly to an angry face directed toward the viewer, and a frightened face is directed elsewhere. So if you look in your textbook, they actually show the different facial patterning. So you might want to check that out to show, like, when the person's looking at you, you can see it for yourself. When the person's looking at you, that you interpret the face as very angry, but when they're looking away, you won't feel such an anger reaction. And then here, this is a really interesting point, this bottom point right here. The amygdala also responds to stimuli not consciously perceived. Have you guys ever felt like you're sitting in the restaurant and it's like you feel someone looking at you, and you turn around and sure enough you see that someone is staring at you? So the amygdala gets information before the cortex. So the cortex is your consciousness, and so the amygdala will actually react to things that the cortex doesn't quite know about, and that's why this is your gut feeling. The amygdala is your gut feeling, but the thing is that the amygdala was set up during childhood, so sometimes our gut feelings are right and sometimes our gut feelings are wrong. For example, I'm afraid of snakes, and so when I'm walking in the woods, I think that my amygdala would become very sensitized to a stick, but I could have a full-blown gut reaction to a stick there, but and my amygdala was wrong. So sometimes when we have these gut reactions of not liking a person, it's not so much that person, it's that person looks like someone from our past where it was set up. So the amygdala, when you're getting that gut feeling, I don't know, I just feel that way, that's the amygdala. But please understand that sometimes the amygdala is right and sometimes the amygdala is wrong. The rule of thumb that I like to share with my students is, if you have a fear about something, I would question the amygdala. But if it's an area where you feel kind of neutral on and you're getting a gut feeling, then I would kind of go with it. That's just a little rule. But, you know, in humans, damage to the amygdala does not result in the loss of emotion. If you remember that picture that I showed you, emotion is all over the brain. Damage to the amygdala impairs the processing of emotional information when the signals are subtle or complicated. So it seems to be this part of the brain that kind of like really analyzes the emotions for, should I be afraid of this? Should I approach this? Should I stay away from this? Amygdala damages the ability to judge trustworthiness in people. People with amygdala damage focus on emotional stimuli the same as irrelevant stimuli or details. So basically what happens is the amygdala seems to make us like very sensitive to emotional stimuli because that's what helps us to survive. So we still can process the emotional stimuli, but the amygdala seems to be the part of the brain that like makes that have the most importance. This is the most important thing to focus on. The amygdala damage also affects the ability to recognize emotion, specifically in photographs or pictures. There's some interesting pictures in your textbook about this. The effect is particularly strong for fear or disgust. The amygdala damage does not affect the ability to recognize fear in real life. And then they talk about attention to certain aspects of the face. They talk about the how big the whites of the eyes are might be an important factor on this. So let's just see, what would you need to know here on this slide? I think from the past few slides, the main gist of what I'd like you to get out of this is that the amygdala seems to be important in processing the nuances of emotion. I don't think you need to get all this down. The main sentence that I'd like you to get out of these slides and out of the textbook is that the amygdala seems to be really important in processing the nuances, the specifications of emotions. Genetic variations in the amygdala arousal may thus underlie some variations of anxiety in the population and related disorders. We're going to find out that also certain types of chemicals and hormones can influence some of us. So some of us may have an amygdala that's more sensitized, and that's something else too, is if a child grows up in a very dangerous environment, or an environment where they really have to look at the nuances of emotion in order to survive, they may become better at picking up on emotions. So you'll see that some people are really good at picking up on the little things. Oh, something's not quite right here, whereas other people aren't. And the environment that we're raised in may sensitize us to that. The arousal of the amygdala relates to the tendencies to experience negative emotions. So again, this may explain some personality differences. Excessive fear and anxiety disorders are associated with hyperactivity in the amygdala. So again, that would be just something that you would think is common sense, okay? If somebody has a lot of fear or anxiety, then we would know, okay, it seems to be the amygdala is overactive. That's the same with the post-traumatic stress disorder. As I told you, I said when somebody experiences something so incredibly, so shocking, then that part of the amygdala seems to just become really, really sensitized. The drugs that are used to treat anxiety are benzodiazepines. This is your valium. They bind to the GABA A receptor and facilitate the effects of GABA. They exert their effects on the amygdala, hypothalamus, midbrain, and other areas. The main thing that I'd like you to know off this slide is that the benzodiazepines are the most commonly used anxiety disorders, and they facilitate the binding of the GABA A receptor. So if you could get these two red marks, that would be great. I'll give you a second to write that down. Okay, so remember I told you on another slide that there's some chemicals inside your body that like influence how much anxiety you feel. So some of us that aren't very anxious, we look at other people and we're like, oh my God, why are you so uptight? Why can't you just chill out? And again, this could be the way their amygdala is sensitized. It can also have to do with these hormones here. So diazepam-binding inhibitor is a naturally occurring protein which attaches to the same sites as benzodiazepines, and they block their effects. And then endazepines are a neuromodulator that include diazepam-binding inhibitor and other related proteins that work to increase levels of fear and anxiety. So these two, diazepam-binding inhibitor is a form of endazepine. Endazepines are these chemicals in your body that seem to increase your anxiety. So I think we're going to have a slide where I put this on there is you don't want to have too little anxiety, and you don't want to have too much anxiety. It seems like the perfect way to be, or not, well, a good way to be would be the middle of the road. Because if you don't have enough anxiety, then you might walk into a situation where you just totally get taken, where you should have been more anxious, you should have been more cautious, so then you could be ready to fight something off, or you could be ready for someone to get one over on you. So if you have no anxiety, then you don't show caution where you need to show caution. If you have too much anxiety, then it inhibits you from functioning properly. You can't think, it causes lots of stress on your body, so on and so forth. But some people may have more endazepines, and so therefore they feel more anxiety related to their chemical. people who are alcoholics, they may have more of this chemical, and so they're, self-medicating because alcohol is working similar to a benzodiazepine. It enhances GABA's effects. Okay, so let's finish this up as a review of the main points that I think I taught you about attack and escape behaviors. So attack or aggression, the main area that they're focusing on is the corticomedial amygdala. We also talked about the presence of high testosterone levels, and we talked about low serotonin as measured by serotonin turnover rates, which would be the 5-HIAA. However, it's not well understood because the testosterone levels are just a little bit higher in offenders, and the low serotonin, that seems to be complicated. But then also another main point was that testosterone tends to alter the way we see things, and that's, the way we interpret things, and that's something to understand. Throughout this whole class, I think a big point to remember is that when you see something, you're seeing it with your brain, and when I see something, I'm seeing it with my brain. Then when we went to anxiety, the main part of the brain that we focused on was the amygdala, and we realized that the amygdala isn't just the only place in the brain where emotions are, but it seems to be important in focusing in on the importance of the emotion. And then we talked about that some people may have an amygdala that's genetically set up to be more anxious, and also it can be altered by the environment, the way they were raised. It can be altered by post-traumatic stress syndrome, like one event can cause it to become overactive. Then we talked about that there's something inside of our body called diazepines, and a form of diazepam is diazepam-binding inhibitor, and people with higher levels of this tend to be more anxious. We talked about that we treat anxiety with benzodiazepines, which facilitate the binding of GABA to the receptor. And we also talked about that there was a genetic component. So I know there was a lot of writing on all the slides, and I want to reinforce that that you don't have to write everything on the slides. I think that if you get these main points out of the lecture for the anxiety and aggression, the attack and escape behaviors, I think you'll be fine. So I'm going to follow this module up with a couple of videos to kind of reinforce some interesting points about emotional behaviors.